Hi there, my name's Nelson Samayo and I'm a Senior Systems Engineer here at Veeam Software. And today I'd like to talk about what's new for AWS, Azure and Google Cloud. Now before we get into the new features and capabilities and go through any demonstrations, I'd like to talk about hybrid infrastructures in the last 2 years and where we see it going in the next 2 years. Now every year, Veeam release a data protection report which allows us to survey over 3,000 IT leaders across organizations and provide their input on where they see their organization going. Now, looking at this particular slide, what we can see is that focusing on the left three most columns, which are really the years 2020 right up until this year of 2022, the actual percentages across physical, virtual, and then cloud. And then the right most two columns are looking at the anticipated percentages of the years 2023 and 2024, which we've been able to get from the data protection report. Now, it's no surprise that along the years, we've seen physical infrastructures decline and, really look at some of these organizations moving their workloads either into virtualizing them in their data center, but most likely and more apparent from the figures, moving them into cloud, whether it be in the hyperscalers or a managed service provider. Now, in the next 2 years, in 2023 and 2024, we can see that a lot of organizations have really emphasized on moving these workloads into cloud, but we can see from the report a plateau at 52% for 2023 and 2024. Now, what we think has happened here is that we think that organizations are still very much focused on moving workloads into the cloud, but have actually found a balance or a sweet spot where they've worked out workloads that may still need to run on-prem because they're legacy applications or have specific hardware requirements, and they're obviously going to run on-prem to meet those particular needs. Organizations have virtualized whatever workloads they need to run from the data center to achieve whatever performance, recovery time objectives that are required to meet the business needs, and then moved whatever workloads they were able to into cloud or into managed service provider environments where they want to leverage those specific advantages that they can get from cloud. Now, speaking of cloud advantages, what are some of the advantages? And no doubt a lot of you that are using the cloud today, these would be the reasons that you would have moved your workloads into the cloud as well. And the first one is around flexibility. Of course, there's a huge number of options today with all the different hyperscalers, whether it being Amazon, Azure, or Google Cloud, all the other providers out there, and even the managed service providers who you can start to leverage. But one of the greatest things about cloud is the actual speed of being able to provision services and provision workloads and being able to spin up the environment very quickly and scale up to meet the demand of business requirements today. Now, elasticity has played a very big part of organizations moving their workloads to cloud, purely because they've got specific workloads that needed that elasticity, needed to burst during certain times of the day to meet the business need and be able to burst to get those resources, and then obviously during off-peak, be able to go back down again and save money. Now, obviously, speaking of money, a lot of organizations have looked at moving away from a CapEx upfront model and looking at more of an OpEx and pay-as-you-go on a monthly basis. And a lot of the hyperscalers allow you to pay for those services or pay for the storage you're consuming on a monthly basis. Then, of course, last but not least, but resiliency and availability. We all know that the cloud providers, whether it be in the hyperscalers or even the managed service providers, do provide extremely good resiliency with allowing your data to be replicated between zones like in AWS, or even Azure offering their backups being replicated between geo-redundant zones as well. So resiliency has certainly played a big part of our customers looking at cloud. Now, when it comes to cloud, there really has been a big struggle around data protection, and we see this with a lot of customers today. And whether it's because you're still using a legacy backup solution today, which is very much being catered either for the physical infrastructure or cater for the on-premise data center. And when it comes to cloud, still leveraging either agents that need to be deployed to cloud, but not really having any cloud native integration to protect those workloads. We also see a lot of cloud providers and all the hyperscalers have their own cloud native backups or cloud native snapshots, which I like to call it, since they're we don't always see it snapshots as a form of backups. But of course, a lot of the hyperscalers do have their own backup. So AWS backup, Azure backup. And the biggest drawback here, or the biggest struggle here, is really around the cost of storage that's required. Because a lot of the native backup tools are purely just relying on their snapshots and being able to back up to an Azure Vault, for example, which is actually a lot more expensive than leveraging their blob storage, and then even more expensive than leveraging their archive tiers, and exactly the same in AWS as well. So with that, I really wanted to focus on what Veeam is offering today. Veeam has a platform that provides not only backups in the hyperscalers, but Veeam's focus in the last couple of years and moving forward is very much going to be around cloud, SaaS, security, and of course Kubernetes as well. So we certainly do see a lot of organizations leveraging SaaS for a lot of different reasons, not just Office 365, but we see SaaS being a very big part of it. And we also see Kubernetes playing a very big role in the move to cloud. So when it comes to Veeam today, we do have a single product that has a very broad native support. And whether you're wanting to protect your physical, virtual, cloud, SaaS, Kubernetes, we've got a single product that allows you to provide support for all of those workloads, no matter where they are. And that's a really important thing because Veeam allows you to centralize management of all your different infrastructures within a single place. And we enable that by providing our customers with a universal license that is purely based around instances. And whether you're running workloads on your physical infrastructure, on your virtual infrastructure, on your cloud infrastructure, this universal license allows you to be completely portable and allows you to move your workloads around, but be able to manage it from a central location and be able to see your policies for your physical, virtual, be able to see your policies for your cloud workloads, which we've got specific plugins for the cloud native appliances, and really giving you that single pane of glass where you can manage everything from. Now, obviously, ownership and control of your data is something that we are seeing a lot of customers ask for day in, day out. And this really means that a lot of customers today might be backing up their workloads in their virtual environments, but want the ability to be able to restore those workloads to one of the hyperscalers. So being able to take a VMware virtual machine and restore it to Amazon, for example, or restore it to Azure, and have that virtual machine provisioned in Azure and run up in Azure. And then tomorrow they may have the requirement to take one of those workloads in Azure, which are being protected by Veeam, and potentially bring it back on-prem, whether it's because of the application, whether it's because of the cost, or whether it comes down to the recovery time objective and needing the ability to now run that workload on the VMware environments. And Veeam can take that workload that's been protected in Azure and actually begin to restore it back on VMware. So giving you that seamless ability to be completely portable, be mobile with your data, and have complete control of it, rather than sort of being locked into just one specific vendor. All right, so when it comes to modular flexibility, Veeam is really offering you a platform that allows you to have, for example, with the hyperscalers, our cloud native products that can run independently of any other product. They can run in the cloud. If you're all in the cloud organization today, those cloud appliances are all you need to run in Azure, AWS, or Google Cloud without having any other components that are required in order to do that. But obviously, if you want to get the central visibility, if you've got a hybrid infrastructure and you want to have central management and central visibility across the whole lot, then of course you can start to plug in those components that you need, like Veeam backup and replication and the cloud appliances, which are today integrated through our plugins. All right, so what's actually new with the cloud in the Veeam platform? Now, Veeam has obviously got the ability to deploy these cloud workloads, or to deploy these cloud appliances, I should say, in the hyperscalers, and allows you to begin to back up those workloads in AWS, Azure, or GCP. And one of the biggest benefits of these appliances is that they can allow you to automate your cloud policies based on how you're protecting them. Now, whether you're using tags or whether you're using resource groups in Azure, it gives you the ability to specify how you want the policies to be protecting these workloads. So in terms of what workloads we're protecting today, now in AWS, we can protect your EC2 instances, we can protect your RDS instances across all the different databases that are available, including the new support for Amazon Aurora. We've also got the ability to protect your Amazon EFS shares and your VPC configurations, which are not protected today natively by Amazon. Now, in terms of Azure, we've got the ability to protect the Azure IaaS, your Azure virtual machines. We've got the ability to protect SQL managed instances and databases within Azure. And a new addition to the latest version of Azure is the ability to protect Azure files. Now, in terms of Google Cloud, we've got the ability to protect Google Cloud VMs, but also the latest version of Veeam Backup for Google has introduced the integration with backing up MySQL. All right, so security plays a very big part of, no doubt, protecting workloads in cloud. And one of the things that we've got in all the cloud appliances is integration with things like the Azure Key Vaults for encrypting backups, using KMS for AWS for encryption, or using Cloud KMS in Google to ensure that you can enable encryption and ensure that your backups are completely secure. And for those of you that have got different administrators who need to access the cloud appliances, all the appliances today now have role-based access control, where you can have a portal administrator who has got complete control over the appliance. You can have a portal operator who is someone who can log into the appliance and look at how the policies are going, restart those appliances, but doesn't have complete control over everything in the appliance. And then you've got a restore operator, which is someone who can only perform restores from the cloud appliances. Now, without a doubt, the biggest benefit of being able to back up in cloud is leveraging cheaper object storage. And the cloud appliances today do direct backups to object storage. And they allow you to leverage the different tiers of being able to go from, say, S3 to Glacier or Deep Glacier, or going from Azure Blobs to Azure Archive tiers, and allowing you to leverage some of those cheaper tiers for your longer term retention. So whether it being your monthlies or your yearlies, being able to send those backups to a Deep Glacier, for example, and store your longer term retention there. Now, one of the things we're really going to focus on, and we're actually going to jump into a demo, is actually around the new dashboards that have been introduced in the new versions. And the new dashboards give you a huge amount of insight into what's happening into the cloud appliances. They really are going to allow you to get much more out of the appliances. And let's now take a closer look at what they're actually offering. All right, so I'm just going to switch over to the cloud appliance here. Now, what we're looking at is we're actually looking at the AWS appliance here that we've got running. And in fact, I've got all the appliances across Azure and Google that I've logged into. And I'm going to go through the dashboard, for each particular one. They all have very similar dashboards with some specific things that I will make a point of as I go through them. But if we start with Azure, for example, what we're going to see straight away is information about the sessions that have run in the last 24 hours. And this really shows me if there's any jobs that have actually failed. And I can quickly click on that and it would take me to the session log where it's essentially filtering out any of the policies that have been running and any of them that have been failing. Now, obviously, thankfully, we've got no failed jobs there, but I can look at all my successful jobs and, I can see every job that was successful. And that really gives me an at-a-glance perspective of how my policies are going within Azure. And as we sort of move across to our successful policy tasks, I can take a look at not just the last 24 hours, but go back and actually look at either the last week or the last month, or even if I need to look at the last year, and get a glimpse of how successful our policies have been. And we can see here that Veeam is still taking snapshots, which allows us to recover from, but also then taking backups from those snapshots. And we can see here that we've got 100% successful rate across the policy tasks. So giving you a very easy way to see whether your jobs over a longer period of time have been successful, and whether there is any failed jobs that you need to look at. Now, protected workloads plays a very big part of what the appliance is offering, and that's because it allows you to add your subscription for Azure, for example, or add your entire region for AWS, or your project for Google. And it allows you to look at what actually is protected within that subscription, or within that region, or within that project. And for example, here on Azure, I can actually see that out of the 16 virtual machines, that I'm actually only protecting 3 of them. And just the same for Azure SQL, I'm actually protecting the only SQL instance that we've got. And I'm only protecting 2 out of the 8 Azure file shares that we've got in Azure. And if we look at the dashboard for AWS, we're actually going to get a very similar view, but for the services that we're protecting in there. So we can see the number of EC2 instances, RDS, and then EFS. And then for Google, we're able to see the same thing for virtual machines and for the cloud, for any MySQL databases that are there as well. So it's really giving you an idea of, are you protecting everything in your environment? And naturally, it gives you an indication as to if application owners are deploying new virtual machines, new databases, new file shares, are they automatically being added to the cloud policies? And if not, that's where you can start to leverage tagging or resource groups and so on to ensure that those workloads, those databases are automatically added to a policy. Now, as we sort of look down here, we can see some storage usage, whether it's your backups or your archives. We can get an idea of what's actually sitting in the hot tiers of Azure, as opposed to what's sitting in the cool tiers, and of course, what would be sitting in archive. And we get a very similar perspective if we're looking at AWS, with going from standard, S3 standard to Glacier and Deep Glacier, and then of course, with GCP as well, going from standard to archive. Now, one of the greatest additions to these dashboards is what we're seeing here around top policies. And top policies is giving you an indication of how long your policies are taking every single time they are run. And what it's really looking at here is for each time that they're run, if there's an increase time or increased duration that's been taken, whether it's a snapshot policy, whether it's a backup policy, or whether it's an archive policy, Veeam is going to give you an idea of an increase in that time, or potentially even a decrease in that time, and give you an idea of just how long that policy has been taking. And if it's been taking a significant amount of time, it would really raise the question as to, well, why has that job been taking a lot longer than it normally does? Is it because someone added a whole bunch of new workloads to the policy? And that may be expected, especially for a whole bunch of new workloads have been created and have been assigned a particular tag and automatically added to that policy, then that would make sense. However, it's really here to highlight where you're potentially getting a significant increase or decrease for that matter. And decrease would really highlight, well, what has actually changed in the backup policy? Has any of the workloads been removed? And it could be because someone accidentally modified a tag or moved it from one resource group to another. And as a result, it's no longer part of a backup policy. So top policies really highlights any potential issues which may be expected, but also allows you then to review whether it is a problem or not. Now, last but not least, we're going to look at the bottlenecks overview here. And all the appliances have a very similar Very similar dashboard for bottlenecks overview, but I'm going to use the Azure one as an example, and then I'll sort of go to the other ones and point out some of the specific things. So total work wait time, which is actually applies across Azure and GCP, is actually really looking at the workers, and the workers they're essentially the workhorse in these cloud appliances. They're the ones that will be spun up on demand. There are auxiliary appliances that get spun up during backup operations, even during some recovery operations and archive operations, and then they get spun back down. But during backup operations, the total workers' wait time is going to indicate where you've either got enough workers to back up all the workloads that you've got in a particular policy, or where you potentially don't have enough workers, to process all those jobs. And it could really highlight a couple things. It could really highlight that you've either got multiple policies running at the same time, and that the policies are requesting too many workers to be spun up. Now, we're going to go through workers a little bit more in depth in the next demo, but what this bottleneck is really meant to highlight is whether you've staggered your policies enough. And if workers are waiting a long time to be spun up, it could be because you've got too many policies running at the same time. So it might just be a matter of looking at your policy schedule time, staggering them a bit so that they're not overlapping each other, or increase the number of workers that have been assigned within the configuration. And we'll look at that in the next demo. Now, as we can see here, CPU quota. And CPU quota is something that applies both to AWS, to Azure, and GCP has its own region disk quotas. But this really highlights for every worker that you spin up, you are spinning up additional CPU cores. And every region, every hyperscaler has a certain limit in terms of how many CPUs can be spun up. So this is really to give you an idea of whether you're getting close to the limit. And it'll obviously, provide a warning if you are spinning up too many workers within that region. It'll highlight it here. Now, down the bottom here, we're looking at storage account, and when writing backups to a particular storage account, Microsoft will eventually throttle backups that will throttle data that's been written to a particular storage account. So for best practice, we encourage that you're not writing all backup policies to a single storage account. Obviously, for best practice, it is recommended to have multiple storage accounts, and that you're spreading your backups across different storage accounts so that you're not going to hit those limits of being able to write to the storage account. So here it obviously shows that we're not being throttled, but at some point, if I was to throw a lot more policies at this single storage account, it would get to a point where it is throttled, and Veeam would highlight it here. Now, if we look at some of the other appliances, we've got appliance disk usage for AWS, and we actually have a very similar thing for GCP, but looking at appliance memory sizing. And these are really looking at the disk that is actually used to run the appliance, the disk that is used to store the configuration database. And this will give a warning when that disk gets to close to 80%. And if it does, it just means that you've got to expand that EBS disk that's attached to the appliance. And it's really ensuring that you're going to be notified when these appliances are reaching their limits, so that you can start to address whatever the issue may be. All right, so that's pretty much all I had on the dashboards. Now, what we're going to take a look at now is actually the new worker profiles that have been introduced in the new versions of the cloud appliances. And we're going to take a look at some of the customizing that you can actually do now with the worker profiles. So let me just switch over to our appliance again. All right, so I'm going to use the AWS appliance here and go into configuration. And I'm going to go down to our workers, and what we can see here is the worker configuration that we've got created here. And this particular worker configuration allows us to choose the region, the availability zone, the virtual private cloud, the subnet, the security group that I want to use, where I want these workers to be spun up, And the same really applies for Azure. You're essentially choosing your region, your networking, where these workers will be running. Now, in terms of the workers, so in previous versions of the cloud appliances, you only had the option of choosing a single worker size to process your backups. Now, the worker, and if I go to Azure for a few moments because I've got this set up, you're going to be able to choose a specific worker for backing up specific type of workloads. Now, if I take a step back, we'll see here what Veeam considers to be a small profile, a medium profile, and a large profile, and then an archiving profile. Now, anything that's less than 100 gigs would be a small workload, and anything that's between 100 gigs and 1 terabyte would be considered as a medium workload, and then anything over 1 terabyte would be considered a large profile. Now, in our previous versions of Veeam, you could only choose one instance type to back up all your workloads. And as you'd imagine, this created a lot of problems for a lot of organizations where they had mixed different types of workloads, where some were small, some were extremely large, and they really didn't have an instance that could cater for all three. And what they were really faced with was problems around backing up these workloads in time. And if a workload is taking a lot longer to back up, it simply means that you're going to end up paying a lot more to run these API calls, the more transactions, and the longer it takes to back up, obviously the more expensive it is. So by having a way in the new version of being able to specify an instance profile for small, medium, and large really gives you a lot more control over the efficiency of backing up these workloads. Now, as you can see here for Azure, if I go into this particular one and I edit the settings, our simple configuration was the only option you had in the previous version. So in the current iteration or in the current versions, you can choose advanced configuration, and you can then go through and choose which workload or which instance size is going to apply for the small worker profile. Now, these are based on best practices. So as soon as the appliance is deployed, you can choose the advanced configuration. It will allow you to choose which instances you want to select for your environment. Bear in mind that backup operations are CPU intensive. So leveraging the F-series VMs here, as we've chosen, is best practice. And any archive operations, which we can see here, archive operations are really memory intensive. So looking at either the D series or even the E series, where they're more focused on memory optimized instances, is going to allow you to have control over being able to choose those instances and cater it for the archive operations as well. Now, something to mention while we're on the topic of workers is actually that there is a best practice guide that Veeam has released not that long ago. And for those of you that are looking for it, it's under our best practice guide. And as long as you go to bp.veeam.com, /VB Cloud, you'll then get access to the best practice guide for AWS, for Azure, and Google as well. And what you'll notice is that in the best practice guide, when you go down to workers, it'll actually give you the worker sizes and the recommended instances that we're recommending for these type of workloads. And then, of course, the associated backup speed that you would expect from choosing one of these machine types. And the reason that they're all going to vary is that different machine types will have different network throughput. So hence for the larger workloads, why the F8S, for the over terabyte workloads is going to give you a much better backup speed and why you would be better off choosing that. All right, so if we come back to the worker profiles, so once we've got everything configured, we can cancel out of that. And if we go back to networking, you'll see here that we've got the same configuration that we've had for in AWS, where you can choose your virtual network, you can choose your subnet, and you can obviously choose the region that your workers are going to run in. So all of the cloud appliances have very much a similar process, so a similar setup, I should say. So AWS, you've got the concept of a small, medium, and large. Azure's the same, and the only difference is that in GCP, you've only got the concept of being able to add a primary and secondary profile, and then of course an archiving profile. So very similar. It only gives you two profiles, but once again allowing you to choose specific profiles for your primary and your secondary type workloads, and still being able to then leverage memory optimized workloads for the archive operations. Now, one thing I did want to note about the workers is that if we're looking at Azure as an example, and we let me go back to profile, and if we choose this particular one here, and I go into edit, you'll notice that when we choose the worker configuration, that we've also got the minimum number of workers and the maximum number of workers. And what this allows Veeam to do for Azure specifically is actually have workers that are spun up on demand. And in this case, I can spin up a maximum of 5 workers that will be assigned to the backup policies. Now, I'm keeping a minimum of 1. And what that means is that the other 4 workers, once they've spun up and once they've been used to run the backup operations, they'll actually get destroyed. And they're only used for the time that you're backing up these workloads. So you're only paying the running cost for these workers while they're performing backups. Now, once all the backups have been completed, Veeam is going to keep a minimum of 1 worker, but keep it in a stopped, deallocated state. And the reason this is actually a great idea is because when it comes to doing recoveries, you actually need the worker, or you need a worker, to be spun up to do things like restoring files from virtual machines. And if you've got a worker that's already been created, but just in a stop state, it's very easy for Veeam to start up that worker and allow you to do those quick recoveries that you need to, with the cloud appliances. All right, so hopefully everyone got some good insight there in terms of the workers and the dashboards. Thank you everyone for joining the session today. A lot of these new features and capabilities have already been introduced to both Veeam Backup for AWS, for Azure, and for GCP. And hopefully you guys got some great enjoyment out of the session. Look forward to catching up with everyone soon.